and welcome to those of you in the classroom and those of you watching online. This class is in-depth astrological delineation. That means we're going to really deepen our skills in terms of looking at charts and interpreting them in order to make sure that over the next few weeks, this is a short class, it's only 5 weeks, but to make sure that we're all sort of singing off the same sheet of music here. Tonight's class is going to be basically a primer on the steps that we take in looking at any chart. So I'm going to walk you through that process. We're actually going to look at a chart tonight, and at the end of the class, I'm also going to bring up the horoscope software, because several of the students in class have that, as well as those watching online. And I'm going to give a little bit of a tutorial in terms of how to work with that software. The skill of a good astrologer, which I hope to produce in this class, actually comes through having an expansive vocabulary and being able to tell a story, being able to look at this set of symbols and give it language where it has meaning to the person you're talking to. So, the important thing in learning how to read a chart is to take an ordered approach. So many persons, when they approach an astrological chart, just want to jump from one area or another, wherever their attention is drawn. However, yes, help yourself to handouts. However, if you take an ordered approach, your skill level will increase. And I'm going to give you a quote here from Horary Astrology by C.C. Zane. And that is, observation indicates that many astrological practitioners follow no definite system in delineating a horoscope. Like beginners usually do, they have a tendency to wander aimlessly from one indication in the chart to the next that happens to strike their fancy. A study of such delineations and the opportunity to witness the result of such lack of method among students who visit our classes has convinced us that any astrologer will find it a distinct gain in precision and in the amount of detail he can extract from a chart if he will adopt some regular order of sequence in which to consider the various factors that enter into a delineation. This was written almost 100 years ago, but it still holds true today. What's even harder for today's astrological students is many are not learning the process from the ground up in terms of how to calculate a chart. And so there's a lot of things which are learned conceptually through arranging the zodiac around the house cusp and placing the planets in the signs and degrees, and actually measuring by hand the aspects between planets, where things come together conceptually for the astrologer. In today's astrological world, computers do that for us. And I'm the kid that sat in 3 algebra classes thinking they were speaking Chinese. So it really took some effort for me to learn how to set up a chart. And I actually do believe that the astrologer, I think for somebody who's going to be a professional, I think knowing how to set up a chart is a great advantage. But in the long run, I do think that the astrologer's time is better spent being a counselor than a mathematician. Because to do a chart properly, to be able to calculate the natal chart, all of the aspects, to do the astrodynes, and to do 3 years of progressions with beginning, middle, and end dates, would probably take 32 to 40 plus hours of math alone. And who can afford to pay you for that? So the astrologer's best skills are to become a skilled counselor and be able to interpret the chart and assist someone. The computer can do what would take me 32 hours in less than 2 minutes. So,
where would I download this software?
I think it's downloadable on our website. We sell it in our bookstore. So, but you'll be able to, at least learn it as we do it here. There are some sites where you can get charts calculated for free. Astrodienst or astro.com is one of them. They do not do hermetic astrology, but one can certainly get basic charts drawn up without having to incur.
Do you have to buy the program here?
Yes, our program is not free. You do have to buy it. But
it's not very well worth it.
It's free just to get a chart.
Right.
all right, let us move forward here. All right, we use 7 steps in judging, though it seems like more by the time we get to the end of it. There are actual generalities we cover before we begin following the steps. Basically, again, remaining orderly in one's analysis allows for a clear and succinct interpretation. Because if you're looking at all of these factors in advance, you're going to form a more complete picture than just jumping from one area of the chart to the other. So the generalities we look at in the chart are fairly basic, but they give us a great deal of information about a person. One of the things that is common when we glance at a chart is to try and note if there are any retrograde planets. Now, retrograde planets are marked with an R. That's indicated here. We can see Uranus is retrograde, Pluto is retrograde, Saturn is retrograde, Mars is retrograde, Neptune is retrograde, and I think that's enough. Retrograde planets, Zane describes as repression. Something that is repressed is there, it's in existence, but it has a hard time expressing itself. So what I have discovered in looking at charts that have a lot of retrograde planets, these are individuals whom, as they mature, they continue to discover things about themselves. They're able to tap into these qualities that have not had an easy time or expression, and they're able to develop them over time. So in a sense, if you have a lot of retrograde planets, then you're going to have a lifetime where you're on your own personal archaeological dig, discovering things about yourself and pulling them to the surface and bringing them into greater expression. Now, what retrograde is, and the important word here is apparent, which means appears to. Retrograde planets, I'm going to use an example. Chances are have any of you done train travel? And sometimes when if you're sitting in a train yard and there's other trains by you, and when the train starts to just pull out of the yard, it looks like the other trains are going backwards. Or you may have, if you drive clutch, stick shift, and you just slightly let up on the brake when you're stopped at an intersection, it may appear that the car next to you is moving forward. So these are apparent motions. It just appears to us like that. Well, as the planets are revolving around the sun, they're moving at different speeds. And so what happens is we're looking at it from Earth. And as we are also moving around, the planet, in relationship to the backdrop of the zodiac, starts to appear as though it is moving backwards. Because as the Earth moves forward, that planet shifts in its apparent motion. So that is the physiological description of what a retrograde planet is. They don't really stop in their tracks and turn around and go backwards and then stop and go forward. But it's based on the relationship of being on a moving object, looking at a moving object. But from the interpretation standpoint, these are qualities which are somewhat held down, and they take additional effort or awareness to bring out. So in looking at this chart, we would say all right, you've got all of that in your notes. In this chart, there are 5 retrograde planets. So, what would we say? Late bloomer.
Christopher, may I ask you a question? I read something recently about people that have no retrograde planets. And what this woman said, I think it was Erin Sullivan or something, she said that if you had no retrograde planets, then you had no way to go in. You know, that retrograde tends to make you go deeper or inside. And so these people have a harder time
Being self-reflective?
well, feeling empathy for other people. You know, it was this whole thing on what you did if you had no retrograde. So of course I have no retrograde, and I married 3 men who have no retrograde. So I thought we had no empathy. But that, I mean, that's.
Well, I think people without empathy are described as sociopaths. So that might be a little extreme, but yes, I could see where the end of, well, no, I think I'd have to really look at that, but I think there may be something to, not necessarily a lacking of empathy, but it being harder to, or there being less of a natural inclination to look within. Now, at the end of the class, when we discuss who this is and his accomplishments, this is definitely somebody who looks within. So that will stand out when we do the chart reveal. Now, there is also what is called stationary planets. This is not marked in the horoscope program. When we would calculate charts by hand, we would take note of this. And basically, what a stationary planet is on the day that a planet goes retrograde, or when a planet shifts from retrograde into what is called direct motion, it's considered on that day to be stationary. So it's basically, it appears in the heavens to be going this direction, it stops, and then it goes that direction. So when in a chart a planet is stationary, those qualities are considered to be very enduring. And so we look at what planet is it? Is it Mercury? So the intellectual qualities tend to be enduring. If it's Uranus, then their individualism may be enduring in some way. So we note the planet and the position. The only way you can find stationary planets is by looking at an ephemeris. So this is the ephemeris for the year of birth for this chart. And what I have done on the day of birth is shown that on this day, even though in the chart when we looked at it, Mercury was not retrograde. Mercury had gone direct that day, but Mercury is stationary. It's what we call stationary direct, or we can have stationary retrograde. So if we, that's the only planet in the ephemeris here, or excuse me, that was Venus went, not Mercury, but Venus went stationary. So in this chart we have Venus stationary direct. So we look down the column, we look for the day of birth in the month and year, and we are looking for either an R or a D, because that's the day that the planet either goes direct. We can see at the top of the column that Venus was retrograde up until the 21st of February 1950. which is the date for which this chart is calculated. Any questions on stationary, direct, retrograde? These are just general things. When we're gazing at a chart, these are the preliminaries that we're looking at before we start our interpretation, because it gives us information. We've determined that this is somebody who's always going to discover himself as he gets older and has a great capacity to go within, and that the traits of Venus, which are the qualities of love, may be very enduring for this man. So he could have deep, loyal friendships or love relationships. Now, another generality that we look at in a chart is to see how many planets are above the horizon. Keep in mind, when we're looking at a chart, we're actually looking south. If we were to step out the front door of our classroom here, we would see that the signs of the zodiac, the constellations of the zodiac, fall in a band south towards the equator. So astrologers, we're trained with geography in school to always have north at the top of the chart. But astrologers were always looking to the south because that is where the planets move. They move along the elliptic and they move in the band north and south of the zodiac. So a chart wheel looks like this, a circle of 12 spokes. This is the ascendant, and this is the descendant. The ascendant is where the sun rises. The point overhead represents noon, and the descendant is where the sun sets. And the nadir, the bottom of the chart, is where the sun is at midnight. These are approximates. So you can gather from that about every 2 hours, the sun is moving through a different house. Each of the planets also moves through the chart through the course of the day. It's easier for us to observe the sun because for at least half of the day, it is above the horizon. So we know that from approximately 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., it's here, from 8 to 10, from 10 to noon, from noon to 2, from 2 to 4, and from 4 to 6. It's in each of these different houses, which is why, someone might say, oh, I was born at such and such a time, and I'll say, oh, you have the sun in the 8th house. And you probably have Sagittarius rising. So you can, once you're familiar enough with this geography, this layout of a chart, you can then easily come up with that information. So planets above the horizon are any of the planets that fall in these houses, which are 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. Now, what do we say about planets above the horizon? Well, they bring visibility, or what we term here, publicity. The more planets above the horizon, the more that person has tendencies to stand out in a crowd, to draw attention to themselves, to live a life that tends to have a lot of visibility. So, we also look at planets in this chart. If we look at the planets above the horizon, there are 5. Well, we only work with 10 planets in astrology. So that's half of them. Half of the planets in this chart. Here we have Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, the Sun, and the Moon above the horizon. We have Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, Mars, and Neptune below the horizon. Yes, Shoshana?
I've noticed that all the ones below the horizon are in retrograde.
Interesting. I noticed that too. And so clearly this is somebody who has 2 very distinctly different sides to him. This isn't somebody I know, but he is somebody who will have this very visible social public side and a very introspective, internal, inner world. Yes?
Do you think that it's possible for this person to have either bipolar disorder or multiple personality disorder?
Well, I don't know, because I don't know what the astrological constants are for that mental illness. I'd have to look at, perhaps 100 charts for bipolar disorder to be able to make that kind of statement.
I would say this person has a very hard time with his early development and his development leading up to the social social houses. So,
Retardation?
What's that?
Retardation?
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, this definitely isn't somebody who has, I don't know this man. I only know his public side. So I couldn't address any of this, and he's definitely not retarded. This is one of the more brilliant minds of our century. And as far as I know, it's on the chart. This is a man by the name of Richard Tarnas. But what I like to do is if people know who the chart is in advance, they try to focus on making that fit. Whereas I actually like to go through the process of using our steps to evaluate a chart and then to see whether or not it fits.
I don't know this person.
Okay.
It's a good observation.
No, it's a great observation.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
and again,
Yeah.
we definitely think there's some duality here,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be as extreme as bipolar
Well,
disorder.
but that's what Gemini on the ascendant already indicates. The
It's duality, yes.
Right. So, yeah.
Could be a slow learner.
Well,
I don't think so.
a very, very.
Jupiter and everything.
This person had a lot of time to think and reflect on things in his early youth. And
Maybe he had a lot of time to himself.
yeah, I think so.
So those are the planets above the horizon. And even though you don't know who it is, this is a public person. It's somebody who has been, written about, has, as a teacher and as an author, impacted many lives. So planets below the horizon are the opposite. They tend to be hidden. And these are planets that fall in houses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we know already that in this chart, they're equally distributed. There are 5 above and 5 below. Yes, Barb?
Comment from Walt, the person could be well-rounded.
Exactly. Yeah. Well balanced.
Yeah, and this is a chart where you have planets in a lot of houses. Sometimes you'll get charts, I've seen charts where you have 8 planets in one house, and that creates a very focused individual when you have that kind of a stellium. But this definitely could represent a very well-rounded person, somebody who's equally as comfortable with his public life as he is in delving into the depths of personality and self. But there could be, other factors, Shoshana, for mental illness. And Zane describes the constants for mental illness to generally be afflictions between the moon and Mercury. Because the moon and Mercury in a chart are 2 different types of thinking. If you think of it, what humans have that tend to separate us from the rest of the animal kingdom is we have a highly developed cerebral cortex, and we have rational thinking, logical thinking. We have highly developed language skills and the ability to communicate. Now, granted, gorillas and some other apes can be brought up using sign boards or American Sign Language to the communication level of about, I think, a 5-year-old. And all other life forms have their means of communicating with one another. But we do know that the use of language among humans is very highly developed. So that's one form of thinking, which is more logistical, rational language, the ability to formulate thought, to look forward, and to look to the past. There's another type of thinking which is instinctual. And this is something that all animals have. They don't have time to sit around and be rational. Why is that? Because most everyone is somewhere on the food chain. And if you're not paying attention, another life form can eat you very easily. One idyllic spring day, I was looking out at my apple tree, and there was a collection of house wrens and titmice out there, nibbling away. And I'm marveling at that. And then I'm seeing a roadrunner on the top of my fence. And within a few seconds, the whole flock disperses. And I'm watching the roadrunner basically rip open a little house wren and devour it. That could happen to you if we weren't closer to the top of the food chain. So in every other life form, from amoebas on up, there has had to be this more instinctual brain that is tied into its environment and has a constant awareness of what's going on around it, as well as its relationships to the other life forms around it. And we describe this as being instinct. The moon governs our thinking, but from a different type of thinking than the logical, rational, cerebral thought of Mercury. The moon is our subliminal thinking, what we might term as subconscious, as that realm of intuition, that realm of feeling, that realm of awareness that is not always based on perceptions of our physical senses. So these are the two realms of intellect in a chart. And when they are in conflict with one another, primarily aspects that are in opposition, which means their energies are colliding, or when they're squared 90 degrees to one another, they're in conflict. And that can oftentimes be indicators of what we won't say this is a shoo-in for mental illness, but it can be considered a predisposition. It takes other factors within the environment, life experiences, degrees of vulnerability to bring it into full expression.
I can see you telling your client that. I'm really sorry, but you're mentally ill.
Yeah, you have to be really careful what you say to people. There has to be some degree of responsibility towards a client. So, those are the 5 planets below the horizon. Planets on the east of a chart are planets which are found in houses, oops, not the one I wanted. Houses 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, and 3. This is the eastern half of the chart. Remember, we're looking south. So when planets are in the eastern hemisphere of a chart, we tend to say that the individual has an impact over their environment. They tend to mold events in their environment, or we might say they are at the cause of events in their lives. They make things happen. In the chart that we're looking at tonight, we can see 4 planets in the east. The Sun in the 10th, Moon in the 11th, Uranus in the 1st, and Pluto in the 3rd. So this is somebody who has a moderate ability to impact his environment and the types of things that happens. He can cause events to happen in his life. But primarily in this chart, if there's 4, if we have 10 to work with, there's 4 in the east, then we know there's 6 in the west. So what we say about when the predominance of planets is in the western hemisphere of a chart, we say that this individual tends to be molded by their environment or by circumstances of life. Have you ever felt like you just showed up and things happened to you?
Yeah.
Well, chances are you may have a predominance of planets in the west, because
It would be interesting to see how many cesarean births are over on that side, as opposed supposed to, be in their chart that they would have more on the west because it took no effort. I mean, they didn't use their own effort to get out.
True, though most doctors work within certain daylight hours, which means, and since Venus and Mercury are never more than 45 degrees away from the sun, chances are you're going to have more planets in this part of the chart for cesarean births just because of doctors' schedules. They'll say, I'll be in at 10 tomorrow to do this. We'll start prepping you at 7.
Yeah. I did not.
I'll prep you at 5.
I'll prep you at 5.
But the way we look at this, if the baby survives, they have the right chart. Events in their lives conspired to have them born at that time, whether it was by surgical method or, natural method.
So if they're caught, does that mean are they typically more independent then? Or is it just they're more...
It means that they have to become more skilled. They're less controlling and more influenced. So the success for the person who has the predominance of planets in the Western Hemisphere is determining the attitude by which they will respond to their environment.
Where the other one is more independent to create their
Right.
own environment. Okay.
It's like you have a birthday, and everybody's showing up. And, they don't even acknowledge your birthday. They're just doing their own thing.
Or it's a birthday party, and you weren't involved in the planning. It turned out to be a big surprise. Yes.
So if somebody say
Right.
hates
The person on the
surprises,
eastern
then what
planet,
would you say
the
which
person
side
on the
they
west would,
have?
take us back.
They might have an afflicted Uranus in their chart because they could be perhaps a predominance of fixed signs, which are the ones we looked at earlier, Aquarius, Scorpio, Leo, and Taurus. Or Uranus might be afflicted, which Uranus is the planet of surprises. And if it's not harmonious in a chart, then its surprises to them could be something painful or disruptive rather than a pleasurable experience.
Yeah, like my mother's a Scorpio, and she absolutely hates surprises. Last time the family tried to give her a surprise party, she screamed, hit somebody, and then ran to her room.
Stormed out of the room.
You know what? I tried to give my daughter, who's a Scorpio, a surprise birthday party at Farrell's where they have ice cream. And they came out singing with the cake. And we turned around and we couldn't find her. She was under the table. I mean, because that was Scorpio. What are you doing? She's crying. Yeah.
Well, now, anybody who's listening to this class, please do not surprise your Scorpio relatives. It'll be lost on them.
You will regret it.
I have a question about charts that when they're heavily loaded on one side, and then there's a singleton on the other side. Now, I've always thought that planet just about rules the whole show. I mean, is that the same interpretation you would have?
No, it would depend on the power of that planet. If that planet is actually engaged in aspect with the other planets in the chart, then there is some chance it may be more powerful. But we actually work with a system in Hermetic astrology called Astrodynes, which actually gives very specific weighting to every planet based on house position, based on aspect, number of aspects, the power of the aspects, how close the aspect is to perfect. And it's probably when we go to that in a couple of weeks, you'll see that it's a really valuable way to look into a chart. We'll touch on it tonight at the end when we apply ourselves at looking at this chart with one of the steps. So we note the power in the chart. This is actually the first step. Everything we just did were preliminaries, and we've actually spent almost 40 minutes doing that. So in tonight's class, we're not going to be able to do a full-on reading of a chart. We'll have to do some things in a very cursory way just for time's sake. But when we look at a chart, as you were saying about the singleton, is that powerful? And what we really want to know is what the power is in a chart. Why? Power determines volume of energy. Where you have energy, that is where your attention goes in your life. So the power in the chart shows us where that individual tends to be focused. Volume or power, again, energy. Another thing to note is you can't do anything unless you have the energy to do it. You know, some mornings you have to think about that before your feet touch the floor on the side of your bed, you know.
Or don't.
Or don't. Precisely. So, can't do anything if you don't have energy. The basic rule of thumb with this, though there are exceptions to this, is houses 1, 4, 7, and 10 are called angular. Houses 2, 5, 8, and 11 are succedent. And houses 3, 6, 9, and 12 are cadent. Angular means of an angle. There are 4 angles in the chart. And we talked about them earlier. The cusp of the first house is called the ascendant. The cusp of the 4th house is called the nadir. The cusp of the 7th house is called the descendant. And the cusp of the 10th house is called the midheaven. Now, of those 4 angles in Hermetic astrology, we consider the ascendant and the midheaven to have the value of planets. And we actually measure aspects from the other planets to those points in the chart. Succedent means to succeed or to follow. So we can see 2 follows 1, 5 follows 4, 8 follows 7, 11 follows 10. And then cadent means to fall away. So the cadent houses are most feeble, and they come after the succedent. Now, the way to look at this when we're looking at a chart is we're at a concert. However, we are sitting inside the auditorium. The concert is being played outside the auditorium. And so, depending on where you're sitting, is going to determine your acoustics. If you're by an open door, you get full volume, angular houses. If you're by an open window, you get average volume, succedent houses. If you're by the wall, you're going to get feeble sound acoustics, and these are the cadent houses. So different houses in a chart allow different volumes of energy to express. Shoshana.
What if you're in a stadium and we're wondering why there's a window and a door?
Well, let's say it's not a stadium concert, that we're actually inside an auditorium. And you know, one of the ways I experienced this in the past, I used to attend, when I lived in Los Angeles, Eastern Matins at the Russian Orthodox Church. And in their ritual, what they do is they process around the outside of the church at midnight while chanting. And again, whether you're by the door, the window, or the wall determines how you're hearing the music as it goes on. So, if we look at this chart for power, 3 planets are angular. House number 1, 4, and 10. There are 4 planets in succedent houses. These are houses 5, 8, 11. Also 2, but there's no planets there. And there are 3 planets in cadent houses. So these are Pluto, Mercury, and Jupiter. The cadent houses being 3, 6, 9, and 12. So we can see from this chart that there are only 3 planets angular, 4 succedent, and 3 cadent, that this is a chart that will have about average power. All right, quality. We've looked at power. Another thing we look at in a chart is quality. Quality is your adaptability. The mother that smacks someone and goes to her room is less adaptable than the person that walks into a room where they're shouting surprise and setting off, crackers and streamers and confetti. And what does that person do? They might decide to have cake. It's the old, given lemons make lemonade. So we look at signs to determine their quality. The movable signs, which are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, tend towards being pioneers. So we think of them as being each of these elements, fire, water, air, and earth, in a very high state of molecular activity. Yes?
I just remember what you said about giving the midheaven and the ascendant almost the power of a planet. So, but you don't count that point
Yes,
in
you do.
with the movable. You do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Fixed signs are the perfectors. And they are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. And the mutable signs of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces are adapters. So the movable signs, think of it, the movable signs are there at the quarry knocking the marble out of the quarry. The mutable signs are the ones that may move it to the artist studio, and the artist is the one who's chiseling away and perfecting it into the art piece. But basically, when we look at the predominance of quality in a chart, we can see what level of activity, and that determines how adaptable is this person. Will they like surprise parties? So in this chart, if we look at the qualities, 4 planets in movable signs. So we have Uranus in Cancer. We have Mars, and we have Neptune in Libra. And we have the moon in Aries. 4 planets and the midheaven are in fixed signs. So let's take a look here. We've got Pluto in Leo, and we have Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and the midheaven all in Aquarius, which is a fixed sign. And 2 planets and the ascendant are in mutable signs. So those 2 planets are Saturn in Virgo, the Sun in Pisces, and the Gemini ascendant. So from this chart, we can see there is a predominance of fixity. So this is somebody, although he has pioneering qualities and he has adaptive qualities, this is somebody who's really going to be working at being a perfecter, at being a stone polisher.
And determined.
Yes, determined. Other descriptions can sometimes be rigid or unyielding, as describing the fixed signs in a chart. So now we look at triplicity. And basically, the triplicities are the element. We have the element of fire, which is equal to inspiration. These are Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. The element of earth, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn tend to be very practical. We say someone is down to earth. Air signs, they are the idea people, aspiration. They're social, gregarious. This is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And the water signs are emotional and feeling and sensitive. This is where you get the empathy in a chart. And that is Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So, why is temperament important? It determines everything we do, from the type of job we select to the type of person we're attracted to in a relationship. So let's look at this chart in terms of triplicities. There are 2 planets. Pluto and the moon are in fire signs. Pluto in Leo, the moon in Aries. 1 planet is in Earth, which is Saturn down here in Virgo. 5 planets, Mars, Neptune, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, the midheaven, and the ascendant are in air signs. And 2 planets, Uranus and the Sun, are in water signs. What can we say about this man, just looking at the chart? Aspirational. This is somebody who's going to be social, gregarious, mental, and he lives in the realm of ideas. Yes?
He also has 2 in fire and 2 in water. Sounds a little self-conflicting to me.
Self-conflicting. Well, I think they add balance more than conflict. Though I think when there is a predisposition like this in a element, it can dominate. Now that can bring deficiencies. What do we call people with too much air? Airheads. Now I'm not saying this man is, because he's actually quite brilliant. But the best quality of having so much in air as opposed to water or fire is that this is somebody who's going to be very idea-oriented. But he tends to lack an tent peg. You know, there isn't that much holding him to the earth. Other than perhaps the realities of, you know, aging parents, home, family, old age, infirmity. That will be the reality check on occasion.
Practical person.
Probably not.
No. Not a practical person at all.
But would you think of this as being a brilliant person?
Oh, yeah.
Cutting edge ideas.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
would you think of him as being an authority? I mean,
Sun is at the top of the chart.
Right.
I mean, the sun is in the 10th house.
Yeah, but it's in a water
Okay.
sign. So it has the emotional quality of Pisces, which is humanitarian. So he also has that humanitarian quality.
So he might be an authority in what type of matters?
Protests.
No.
Could be, but towards Pisces, it might be things more mystical,
Yes.
intuitive,
Yeah.
empathetic, sensitive, spiritual. So let's look. Another way of looking at this is part of an Astrodyne report, which actually measures all of the power for us. So if we were to look at the Astrodyne report, we can actually see it spelled out for us. Among the societies, which we haven't even talked about yet, so let's skip down to trinities. No, let's do qualities and elements. Here we have, in air, 44.7% of the power. Earth, 8.5. Some people like numbers. Percentages are a great way to get things in perspective. So, and then in terms of qualities, we can see that this is somebody who is predominantly fixed. Almost equal amounts of energy in matters of pioneering and matters of adaptability. So we can see it broken down by a percentage and by astrological power quotients. For time's sake, I won't get into tonight how this is all calculated, but we'll continue on the process of interpretation. So the next thing we want to know is what's important to the individual. Where is that person placing their emphasis?
Mental.
That is determined by where the planets are distributed among the houses. We have what are called societies, which are the personal houses, companionship houses, and public houses. Personal houses are houses 12, 1, 2, and 3. The 12th houses are subconscious. The first houses are physical body. The second houses are wealth. And the third houses are private thoughts. It doesn't get more personal than that. The companionship houses, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Fourth house is family. Fifth house is lovers and children. The sixth house is your co-workers. And the seventh house are your partners and the public. Those are your companions. And the public houses, 8, 9, 10, and 11. The 8th house is your credit. Hey, Laura. The 9th house is your philosophies and your education. The 10th house is your public visibility and your career. And the 11th house are your associates out there in the world, your circle of friends. That seat is mine, so don't take this one. Because I have to go and work on the computer. So if we look at this chart in terms of importance, there are 2 planets in personal houses. Where are they? Uranus and Pluto. 5 planets fall in public houses: Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, the Sun, and the Moon. Are you getting any ideas about importance in this chart? 3 planets fall in companionship: Saturn, Mars, and Neptune. Is there anything left? No. So, from this chart, we can see that this is somebody who is primarily public with a lesser emphasis on personal and companionship. The reason the personal houses are more powerful here than companionship, even though there were more planets, is that Uranus is in the first house conjunct the ascendant. And that has added the power. So this is why astrodynes are important, because if we just go by the ancient rules, we can miss out on things. The astrodynes actually add up all of the energy in the chart and give a much clearer picture or understanding. Did you get handouts? Oh, good. Glad you're able to self-serve here. So, 2 planets in personal, 5 in public, 3 in companionship. Another way we determine importance in a chart is, again, how are things distributed among the houses? There's another way we measure this influence, and they are called trinities. You can see the word T-R-I, tree, tri. What does that mean? 3. So, in each of the trinities, there are 3 houses. There's the trinity of life, which is houses 1, 5, and 9. 1 is your health, physical body, personality. 5 is your love affairs and creativity. 9 is your travel and philosophies. These are the things we live for. Wealth, 2, 6, and 10. The second house is your personal finances and your assets. The 6th house is your employment. The 10th house is your career. Association means one's associates. The 3rd house is brothers, sisters, and neighbors. That would be a 7 if I wasn't holding the shift key when I printed that. So 3, 7, and 11. The 3rd house I've already mentioned, siblings and neighbors. 7th house is partners and public. And the 11th house is your acquaintances, your larger social group. So if we look, and then there's psychism. I almost forgot about them. So the psychism has to do with more esoteric, intuitive, woo matters. And this is the 4th house, which is the home. We all know that places have vibrations according to what has gone on there. That's why some houses are spooky. Others you go in and you feel angry. There's other places you may visit where you feel completely at peace. The 8th house is death and the spirit world. And the 12th house has to do with one's intuitions and unconscious mind. So these are the psychic areas of the chart. Let's take a peek. In this chart, there are 5 planets in the trinity of life. That's a lot. That's half the chart. Uranus, Mars, Neptune, Mercury, and Jupiter. Only one planet falls in the trinity of wealth, which is the Sun in the 10th house. So the man might have an amazing career, but he may not know. 2 planets are in the trinity of association, Pluto and the Moon. And 2 planets in the trinity of psychism, Saturn and Venus. So if we look at this from the chart, well, life trumps, 39%, and in descending order. Wealth, surprisingly, there's only one planet there, but just as we decided with personal houses, where Uranus conjunct the ascendant, we have the Sun conjunct the midheaven in the 10th house, which elevates the power here, association and psychism. All right. Those are the beginning steps of reading a chart. And this is, again, when we're looking at a chart, we go through these steps because once we start adding all of that up, it gives us information. And I'd say we know a lot of information about this man already, just from these steps. When we read a chart, I combine steps 5 and 6, which are going through each of the houses of the chart and noting the nature of the planetary energy transmitted through each house. What that means in layman's language is look for each house that has a planet in it, because that planet expresses through that house. That's the type of planetary energy. The sign occupied by the planet is included. Again, let's go back to the concert model of looking at a chart. We talked about the auditorium. The planets in an astrological chart are the tones. As you know, the tone of C is moving at a particular vibration, played on a guitar or a piccolo. Still, air is vibrating at a particular rate of motion. Nevertheless, C on a guitar sounds different to us than C on a piccolo, or on a piano, or on a bass, or on, you name it, on a trumpet. Each of the instruments lends a different quality. So the signs of the zodiac, where the planets fall, influence the quality of the expression of that planet. I always combine these steps together. Step 5, when there is more than one planet occupying a house, the planet closest to the house cusp becomes the chief ruler. The house cusp is, when you look at that wheel of the zodiac, that wheel of the chart, the house cusp is the spoke falling before the number.
So it could be different than the sign that's on the cusp.
See here,
In other words, the planet doesn't have
this
to
one,
be
this
equal.
planet rules the house.
Right, but it's very close.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be. It's just the first
But
planet
even-
that shows
Right,
up in
it's
the
considered the chief ruler.
But even if it is the house ruler,
Yeah.
see if the house ruler would be here, this would still.
This over the sign. Okay, this one.
All other planets, including the planet or planets ruling the sign found on the house cusp, become co-rulers. This will make more sense to you once we start going through it. Barb?
And Walt, is there any significance with a house without a planet?
Yes, it generally has less influence. In the exception, if the planet governing the sign on the cusp is receiving a lot of aspects in the chart, then that sign governing the house increases in power. But generally, you will note in the charts you look at that unoccupied houses have less influence in that person's life.
That's the sun, planet.
And, Walt, when a house is unoccupied, it still has a ruler, because we look either at the planet or planets ruling the sign on the cusp. Now again, there are 3 signs which have dual rulers. Scorpio has Pluto and Mars. Aquarius has both Uranus and Saturn, and Pisces has Jupiter and Neptune. So that's when I say planet or planets. Those 3 signs have dual rulership, and we have to look at both rulers. All right, here's another complex thought, but we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. There are also what are called intercepted signs in a chart. In the chart that we're looking at today, what happens is we have, because of the latitude of birth, the further north or south you go from the equator, you have to think of having spokes of a wheel kind of at the racetrack. The racetrack isn't a circle. It's actually an elliptic. So the distance between the spokes is the same, but whether it's pointing at the narrow end of the elliptic or at the flat end, it's taking in a different amount. So what happens is if you are born in northerly or southerly latitudes, you can have intercepted signs. In this chart, we have Leo on the 3rd and 4th house cusp. We have on the 3rd house cusp 4 degrees of Leo, 27 Leo on the 4th house. And opposite that, on the 9th house cusp, 4 degrees Aquarius, 27 on the 10th house cusp. So what this means is that Aries and Libra are intercepted signs. Intercepted signs are generally weaker in a chart, except in this chart for the exception of Libra, because it has 2 planets in it, Mars and Neptune. But for the most part, when signs are intercepted, they aren't touching the cusp of any house. They have far less power. And we call them latent, that it takes a lot of energy to bring out the quality of these signs in a personality. When we're looking at planets in a house, this is really important information now. Where the sun falls in a chart, that area is subject to vigor. That's where the individual's ego and attention goes. That's where they put a lot of their energy in life. Where the moon falls in a chart, that area of your life is going to be subject to fluctuation. Lots of changing conditions in that area of your life, even if it's just the way you think about that area of your life. If you have the moon in the 7th house, then you're going to be questioning your mate every day. You know, oh, I love this person. How did I end up in this relationship? Mercury, where Mercury falls in your chart, that area of your life is subject to thought. So if Mercury's in your 2nd house, you're going to be thinking about your finances all the time. Venus is gratuities. What are gratuities? Gifts. We give gratuities to waiters and waitresses. You know, they're tips. So where Venus falls, this is an area of our life where gifts come to us. So if Venus is in your 11th house, the wealth in your life might be your friends. Or friends may always bring things to you. They don't show up without flowers or a bottle of wine. Or something more useful. Maybe a book or a loaf of bread. Where Mars is in your chart, you have strife. Even if your Mars is really harmonious, it is hard to avoid Mars' nature of haste or anger or irritation. Jupiter brings abundance. Things come in big ways. Saturn brings restrictions or poverty. Where Saturn falls in your chart is where you have a hard time of things. This is where you tend to, have struggles or deficiencies. Uranus brings things with eccentricity and or sudden changes. Neptune is where you need a reality check because it tends towards illusion. Pluto brings coercion or cooperation. But it's oftentimes the area of your chart where people want you to toe the party line, to fit in, to be a part of the group. So the sixth step is note the house actually occupied by the planet ruling the sign on the cusp of each house. Again, over the next few weeks, as we do chart upon chart upon chart, these steps will become more facile and easy to remember for us. Tonight we're just powering through this. But we say where the planet governing the cusp of a house, where it falls in a chart, we say that that area of the chart is subject to authority. When we go through examples, it'll make more sense to you. But if the ruler of one particular house falls in the first house, let's say you have Mars ruling your 7th house, but it actually, the planet, because you have Aries there, but Mars falls in the first house of your chart, we would say that your relationship matters, which are 7th house, are subservient to your personal inclination. That this may be, something that you place your emphasis on. If it falls in the 2nd house, those matters are controlled by money. Let's say the ruler of your 11th house of friends falls in your 2nd house, then friendships are going to be strongly conditioned by money matters. Either friends with their hands out saying, would you get me lunch today? Or it could be the friend that brings you a job. Yes?
Could this be why a lot of people will choose to, say, marry somebody or make friends with somebody because they're wealthy? Because I've noticed a lot of people will do that. My friend Rachel, for example, will dump her boyfriend every single time he doesn't take her out to a fancy date.
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty common phenomenon.
Yeah, it may not even be astrologically indicated. No, it could be cultural and again, most people go through life thinking, what's in this for me? They're looking at what they're getting, not what they're giving. 3rd house means that these matters are subject to kindred and or your education. If it falls in the 4th house, it'll be influenced by your family and home environment. In the 5th house, love affairs, children, creativity, and speculation. If the ruler falls in the 6th house, it's influenced by your work, illness, or your co-workers and employees. 7th house, partners in the public. 8th house, other people's money. 9th house, philosophy and foreign affairs. 10th house, business, your honor and reputation, or by bosses, superiors. 11th house, it will be influenced by groups, clubs, and friends. And the 12th house by secret matters or by psychic influences. So this is a lot of information to absorb at once, but it's in your notes. And once we start using it, you'll have these notes. Bring these notes back every week because we're going to fall back on this information. All right, this is the chart we're looking at tonight. And this is the chart of Richard Tarnas. Most of you are asking who he is, but he is one of the more brilliant minds of this century. Let me find my little bio for you. He's actually written 2 books. The first book was widely accepted. I didn't... Actually, no, that was the second book. The first book was called The Passion of the Western Mind. And this was a narrative history of Western thought, which became a bestseller and actually is a widely used text in most universities. This book received public acclaim. Now, we said this was a chart that lacked Earth, which means one doesn't always know how the world is going to respond. His second book, as Laura brought up, was Cosmos and Psyche. And this was a book where he actually looked at the astrological ages and how trends, historic trends in the world, were influenced by the different cycles of the slower moving outer planets and the different ages of man through the astrological ages, of which we know the age of Aquarius to be one. That was panned by the Wall Street Journal and others. They decided that if this man was to talk about astrology, he had really gone off his rocker and was, out in woo-woo land somewhere. So, now,
It's also been a book that converted some open-minded thinkers to really respecting that there is truly something going on with astrology.
they just failed to write the critiques.
Right.
So, because if in the world of academia you dare to touch upon these matters, you are ostracized. Just as within the world of religious orthodoxy, one can be ostracized if they touch upon these subjects. So, born in Switzerland, he actually was raised in Michigan, taught by Jesuits, so he learned Greek, Latin, and is quite a scholar. Studied Western intellectual and cultural history and depth psychology at Harvard. He graduated cum laude in 1972. Then he went on to live and work for 10 years at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. He studied with Joseph Campbell, Gregory Bateson, Hudson Smith, James Hillman, and Stanislav Grof, and later served as directions of programs in education at Esalen. He also went on to teach at the Pacifica Institute, which houses Joseph Campbell's library in Carpinteria, California. And received PhD from Saybrook Institute in 1976, founding director of the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, which is where he currently teaches. So that's who that is. One of the brilliant minds and teachers of this century. So we've got 40 minutes left. Let's apply what we know to chart interpretation. All right, we want to note the prominence of each planet. This is what we do last. And now, with the advent of having astrodynes available on computer, one can do this without having to do the hand calculations, which is looking at the strength of each house and the strength of each planet and aspect. We look at the most powerful planet, sign, and house, and we look for the most harmonious planet, sign, and house, and we want to note the most discordant planet, sign, and house. So, astrodynes. These are the way to accurately determine all of this. Now, aspects in a chart are thought cell compounds. If you remember a couple of slides ago, or earlier up in your page of notes, we talked about vigor, fluctuation, thought, gratuities, strife, etc. Each of the planets governs a different thought cell. The sun governs the thought cells of power, the moon the domestic thought cells, Mercury the intellectual, Venus social, Mars is aggressive, Jupiter religious, Saturn is safety, Uranus is individualistic, Neptune is idealistic thought cells or utopian thought cells, and Pluto are the universal thought cells. Now what happens is in a chart these combine, and these are what the patterns are they combine in. These little squiggles are called aspects. So as planetary energies meet one another, they are forming compounds. A compound implies something that has more than one element involved. Now, when we look at the horoscope program, we look here at the upper line, which shows us the power of that aspect, and the second line represents whether that aspect's conditioning energy is harmonious or discordant. The higher the number, the greater the power, and the higher the number in the second line, the greater the harmony or the discord. These give us great tools in looking at a chart, because if you also go in and determine the most powerful aspects, in this chart, we can see there is a trine from the Sun to Uranus. The Sun is the power urges, and Uranus the individualistic urges. This is somebody who dares to be different. We could also see the Sun-Uranus trine, since Uranus governs astrology, where this man's interest in making breakthroughs in consciousness and history using the astrological model, the astrological symbols. Astrodynes. Word astro means star, dyna means power. So astrodynes give us the amount of star power in a chart. This isn't quite like Dancing with the Stars, but perhaps it is. Nevertheless, or Guitar Hero, or American Idol, Americans Got Talent, whatever. That's star power. But this is another form of star power, which everyone has. And basically, in an astrodyne report, the planets are listed from the most powerful to the weakest. Knowing this shows you the hierarchy of urges. What dominates a person? Here we can see its originality, followed by power, cooperation, nurturing, idealism. The least powerful here is aggressiveness or assertiveness. So this is a tool that we use in chart interpretation. Over the next few weeks, we'll be applying this. We can calculate this for the planets, the houses, and the signs, which reveals to us. If we look at this man's chart, we've looked at the planets. What we didn't look at is harmony and discord. But I'm going to show you that when we do the astrological program, because I want everyone to be familiar, because we can actually sort the astrodynes in the program according to power, harmony, or discord. So we have a column for power. We have a column for percentage. This is what's most interesting to me, because I like to know the relative relationship of each to one another. In this case, we can see that there are 4 points in this chart of almost equal power, separated by only 1%. And in a chart like that, these are going to be competing urges. The individualistic urges, the ascendant, which is self or personality, the midheaven, the need for drive and visibility, and the sun for power, are all equal in this person's character, close to equal. Harmony is the conditioning energy, whether it's harmony or discord. Think of harmony as being pleasure, and discord as pain. So the higher the number, the greater the pleasure. If there's a minus in front of it, that is not pleasurable. In this chart, we can see it's incredibly harmonious. How dare he? Right. Yes.
What would a masochist's chart be like?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of
Probably all
those,
over the map.
I'm somebody that doesn't believe that astrology explains everything. I think genetics have to be taken into account. I think one's conditioning since birth. So I don't know that one can always look at a chart and see those tendencies. Because the thing is, a chart shows us the individual's potential at birth, but it cannot show us to what purpose that person has placed their will. Both embalmers and serial killers may have an area in their chart which strongly indicates an interest in death. Yet they've each taken a different approach towards that. You know, one, a mortician, is somebody who is helping, you know, dress and deal with funerary rites and dealing with families and their grieving, whereas the serial killer is the person who's creating the source of that grieving. So, you know, from a chart you can see areas of proclivity, but not necessarily how that person has decided to act. So I strongly advise, don't expect astrology to tell you everything, because you could be disappointed. But you can get a lot of information from a chart. I saw a hand go up somewhere. Yes.
I don't know about astrodynes. That's one reason I came to take this course. I don't understand, though, where the numbers come from with the power. Like, I can understand the percentage here comes up with 100%. So it seems like on a rating of power, that everything would have a percentage to 100% again.
It does, and all of that's contained in a book and not in my mind. But it is actually, it's all here. The more aspects a planet has, the more likely it's going to be powerful in a chart. The closer those aspects are to perfect, the more powerful they are. Certain aspects are more powerful than others. For example, normally conjunctions and oppositions are very powerful. Semi-sextiles and semi-squares are weak. So what Astrodynes does is it assigns a mathematical quotient to each of those factors, which then is accumulatively added in a mathematical formula. So if you make a mistake anywhere along the line, you end up with an inaccurate answer. But basically, if you want to read about it, the formulas are in the Astrodyne manual and or in the book 16, Stellar Healing, also gives the formula for calculating astrodynes. But this is basically, the more aspects, the more powerful the aspects. Aspects which are applying come with more force than aspects which are separating.
And as you said before, if something is conjunct the midheaven or the ascendant, it gets more power from that.
Yes, especially if it's
The
in an
placement
angular
of the
house.
planet.
Yeah.
So those are the books. Now, what I want to do is spend a little bit of time going through a program, just so you become familiar how, since we're not doing math by hand, and you can keep the camera focused on the screen, Barb. I'll just be back here like the Wizard of Oz.
Do not look at the man behind the curtain.
Exactly.
Are the books in our notes, or should we be writing these down?
Oh, I hope they're in your notes. I try to put everything in the notes.
Says recommended reading. Page 4.
Thank you.
So, since what we'll do is we'll enter this chart in. When we're going to erect a chart, we're putting the data in. And I believe the birth date is today's date, but in 1950. Yes, we're going to have more little surprises like this. Not next week, but every other week we're going to be looking at a chart of somebody born on that day. I had to make this interesting to me. All right, and the time of birth was what, 11 something?
12:30 p.m.
All right, 12. Oops. 12:30. Now, when we move between zones, we're using the directional keys in this 12:30 p.m., and he was born in Switzerland. So if I just enter a few letters and go down, it'll take me to the country. And then I know he was born in Geneva. So
Jean-Pierre. There you go.
So now what I have to do is go down here and find the where.
What if you just press enter?
You know, that used to work. My screen here is too small. Well, this is kind of a failure of an example here, how to use this.
Did you have to load the time zone, or did it do it for you?
It does it. It automatically calculates it based on having, it has a built-in atlas.
Right.
So,
So it doesn't.
yeah, again, in the old days, we would have to, now, how can I make this screen smaller? Okay, I may have to talk with our expert about this and prepare it for next week, since I can't show you how this works. But what I can do, now you've seen how we enter this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to an already saved
Hey, look,
file.
it's me.
Yeah,
My name's spelled wrong. Don't worry, it is on my driver's license.
okay. Yeah, normally I know it as Shoshona, but your friend gave it to me as Shoshana.
S-H-O-S-A-J-N-A-H is how you actually
Oh, you
spell
have an
it.
H at the end. Okay.
Yeah. Don't worry, even my dad was.
Susanna to the rest of us.
And he's the one that made me that.
All right, I'm going to look up for let's see, is it in here? No. I know I have it. All right. There. Open the chart. Now, if we want to go through the process of interpretation here, we know the first house has to do with health, personality, physical body. The planet falling there is and Uranus, we decided, is the individualistic urges of the soul, the need to be unique and different. So how does that impact this man?
To express his individuality.
Right, which he certainly did with his second book, and became ostracized by some people out there. But again, Uranus is also the interest in the occult, astrology, and other such things.
And with it, in the second degree of Cancer, he's probably highly intuitive about astrology.
Probably.
Definitely.
First decadent, second, first degree also.
Oh,
Well, unless you do zero, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything unusual about his body, since it's the house of the physical body?
Well, I cannot easily bring up the picture, but, you know,
Very
he's...
sensitive digestive system.
He could be subject to stress and
I mean,
digestion.
if he would feel vibrationally things in his gut and.
He's the type of person that wouldn't eat unless he forget to eat because of what he wants to
That
do.
could be, or
Yeah.
or unless the
And therefore he
vibes were
would-
harmonious enough, then he
Exactly.
could eat.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably a child who felt, had indigestion when things
Right.
weren't harmonious
Colic,
or
we
something.
call it.
Could be, yeah.
Colic.
That would be an
Colic
interesting thing
baby.
to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Uranus is only 5 degrees from the ascendant.
Ascendant,
So,
conjunct.
it could, Uranus can make one very kind of lean, nervous, tall, nervous disposition.
Yeah,
All right, second house, which is money and finance. There's no planets there. What do we do according to our rules?
Look at the house
Because
cusp,
The sign on the cusp is,
Cancer.
the planet ruling Cancer is,
The moon.
and the moon falls in what compartment?
the house of
11th
friends
house.
and associates.
So we might say that his money matters are subservient to groups, social organizations, or
People
friends.
donate to his cause.
Right.
Do you think 11th house, not 11th house, 11th house can be audiences too?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
absolutely. They are a group.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
they are.
They
You
are.
hope. You hope your audience is a group. Every speaker
The
does.
buyers of his books, a wide
Right.
audience.
Things that, there are people that have something in common with him also.
Have a common interest.
Also, I was going to ask you, Christopher, the second house, everybody always talks about resources. I think it has to do with personal resources as well, as
Okay.
those things that you express of yourself without any connection to any money. See what I'm saying? That which you possess of yourself that you've been given at birth. So,
Right, it's our values, but it can also be our abilities,
our abilities, exactly, right.
which for some can be translated into money, but not for everyone.
Right, not for everybody.
We've all met people who are incredibly talented and very poor.
Yeah.
He
All
might
right.
also be one of those people who may not care a whole lot about a lot of possessions, but has a complete kitchen at home.
Very good. Again, because it has to do with the nurturing.
Right.
Or that money may come in through women, since the moon governs that
Or
house.
through mom. maybe
Or we
you're-
think of the moon as silver as opposed to gold. How many dimes make up a dollar?
Yeah,
If you have a dollar or you have 10 dimes, you have a dollar.
that's
It's
it.
But-
sad that I had to think about that.
Yes. That's sad. I guess algebra, math wasn't the strong
That's
suit.
not my strong point.
But what is your point then?
That the moon governs silver, which means that when the moon rules the second house, you oftentimes make money through smaller amounts. This could be book by book by book, as opposed, and it fluctuates.
11.
All right, let's look at the third house of mental pursuits. We have Pluto there, and curiously enough, his early education was, Jesuit. It wasn't necessarily cloistered, but Pluto is the planet of conformity, and every educational system does have its own expectations of conformity.
Like research and things not seen.
Things
So-
not seen. So this is somebody whose mental processes are very, think of Pluto as being the underworld. This is somebody who thinks in deep, profound, hidden ways.
And wants to eventually communicate, which he does in the third house. And he has brethren in the Catholic Church.
There you have it. Now, the co-ruler is Leo. The Leo is on the cusp of the house. So to understand the third house, we also have to understand through the sun. The sun is the planet of power and self-esteem and falls at the top of the chart. So this is a man who would take pride in his knowledge. How did he graduate? Cum laude. So this is somebody who can bring in honors and recognition through his writing, third house, or academics. If we look at the fourth house of home and family, we have Saturn here in the sign of Virgo.
But it's in the second decan, which rules Capricorn. So,
Could it be older parents? Sometimes Saturn in the fourth house might be, you're the child of their later years. Or there could be an elder living in the house. And I grew up with a great aunt in my house, and next door were great grandparents. And so you can have sometimes elders in the home, which the fourth house represents. This may be somebody who seeks stability through property or real estate or wanting to have land somewhere.
Could it be that the father rules the roost?
It could be.
And the mother is much more eclectic and out there, and not eclectic, but much more community oriented
And the
visionary.
father, with it, Saturn in Virgo, might also create a parent who is stoic in some ways.
Or highly critical.
Or protective.
Uh-huh.
But it also, Saturn in the fourth house makes for the dutiful son or daughter. This is usually the person who looks out for their parents in old age.
That's interesting.
So the co-ruler is also the sun, so that falls up at the top of the chart, and he's also somebody who could take great pride in terms of where he lives, or may draw some of his vitality from where he lives. That could be one reason he spent 10 years at Essel.
Yeah.
Fifth house, love, romance, creativity. I didn't do enough research to see if he has any children.
he's an idealist when it comes to love.
lover, yeah.
Right. Which is second decan, where he's more like his ideas about love and having children is more futuristic. Like, we'll just do this right now and we'll have the rest later.
Because it's ruled by Aquarius.
Right.
Don't you have to take a reality check?
Yes.
Right, because you got Mars and Neptune. You
Right.
can't-
Right, where you have
That's
Neptune,
part
you
of-
have fantasies. What about the addictive qualities of Mars when it conjuncts Neptune or opposes Neptune?
And combined with the moon in Aries, as you were saying, he might have had
Lots of lovers.
lots of lovers, yeah, or at least
No, his love is more
infatuations with
toward
lots
his,
of women.
Yeah.
his religious institution because the
Mercury is the co-ruler.
Well, yeah, and Mercury is, no, not Mercury, Jupiter is in trine with Neptune. So it's more a love of,
And those are the two rulers of Pisces.
right,
Yeah, love of teaching, the love of
Right.
philosophy.
humanitarian
Spirituality.
quality,
And it may be also
spirituality.
the concept of love, or the fantasy of love, as you were
Right.
saying.
Uh-huh.
Right, addicted to the
Lots of fantasy.
the idea of
about it.
romance.
Yeah.
Right.
What was the power of Mars, too?
Let's take a look.
It was
To
the
To find
least.
the power, Mars was the weakest.
Aggressiveness was the least.
That's what I
yeah.
mean, he'll fantasize about it rather than acting on it.
We can
Right.
sort the
Right.
planets by power.
He's
Let's
taken
talk
by
about
a fictional character.
Or by
I wonder if
harmony.
they use the internet. I mean,
So Mars we can see is both the weakest planet in the chart,
Yeah.
but also it is the most discordant planet in the chart.
Right.
In a very harmonious chart. So if he doesn't have children, that could be a good thing because they might irritate him.
Right.
Well, especially
Sometimes people have children they don't like.
It keeps him from going on the inside and sorting everything out. See, if he has to use his assertive ability, see, in love and romance and everything else that's going on in the fifth house, like Erica said, the playhouse, I'll never forget that. Then it's, it's irritable to him. It's more, because below the horizon, all his planets are, something that he goes deep in thought with. They're retrograde. And so that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, and the way I see it is this is somebody who is his teaching techniques are focused around mythology.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
And that is Neptune, is dealing with the mythic experience.
Right.
Mars conjunct Neptune in this house of creativity is a passion for
So-
the mythical
But they're both
experience.
in relationship signs, but his relationship is of a different kind of relationship than we think of as a relationship. So,
Sixth house of work and coworkers. Just to keep moving, we've got 10 minutes to get through another 7 houses. So we've got a minute apiece. No planets, unoccupied. What are the 2 rulers of Scorpio?
Mars and Pluto.
All right, Mars in the 5th house of love, romance, creativity. Pluto in the 3rd house of writing. The classroom is also the 5th house. If you think about it, you're being entertained, hopefully, when you're in class. So if the teacher's not entertaining you, you won't come back.
Let's say yes, because then you're forced to go back.
All right. Yes, if you're under 18, then you're forced to go back.
16, I quit.
All right, let's see. The 7th house is partners and the public. Jupiter rules that house. Let's look at the 7th house. Again, I don't know if I can get to the bottom of this. So if we look at this,
That's another weak sign.
it is the weakest in the chart. But we look to the ruler. Sagittarius is there. So what planet governs? In the 9th house of teaching, religion, philosophy, and travel.
He has a different kind of relationship and love affair than what everybody else would have.
We better hope his wife teaches with him or
Right.
travels with him.
Yeah. She takes his notes.
Does he have one?
Yes.
He does have one.
Venus, here we have the 8th house of other people's money. We say wherever Venus falls, we have gratuities or gifts. Well, Venus is in the 8th house, which could be attracting in things such as inheritances,
Exactly.
legacies, scholarships, you know, other people's funding or support.
Yeah, his mother probably.
All right, the 9th house of philosophy, the higher mind. This is somebody who works as a professor. Well, the 9th house is 4th in power here. And it is, if we look at it in terms of harmony, it's the 3rd most harmonious. Do you think this man loves teaching and publishing?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And expansion and ideas.
Ideas, Mercury, expansion, Jupiter. And they're in Aquarius, which is unusual things, futuristic. Even the midheaven is governed by Aquarius. So this is somebody who is a futurist in some ways, even though he's delving into the past. He's a professor of history and of mythology.
And has to create the future.
Now, the house of career, the sun falls there. So this is somebody who can command power, authority. This is somebody who's considered an authority in his area. And anybody with a dominant sun feels very confident about their being an authority. So you can't, it may not always be easy to question them, though the sun falls in the sensitive sign of Pisces.
So Neptune and Jupiter rule Pisces. So you can, that's how I drew my conclusion, because he just,
Which
is
conclusion?
humanitarian.
Well, the idea too of Pisces being sort of the Neptune, the cosmic suit. So people that are, like there's been a lot of chairmen of boards that have that Pisces midheaven because they have the overview. They don't need to know how all the particulars worked out, but they need to understand
vision.
the vision. Right, and he had the vision.
Friendships. The moon in Aries in the 11th house. He could know a lot of very powerful women. He might prefer women as friends when the moon falls there, because there can be a greater affinity. When I see the moon in the 11th house, I always think that we're born to a family, but we also choose a family. And when the moon's in the 11th, one chooses their friends as their family. So Thanksgiving or holidays at his home might be with a table of 12 friends.
That's right.
What if there's nothing there?
If there's nothing there, then you look to the sign on the cusp. Let's say in the case of this chart, if there was no planet there, we'd see Pisces was on the cusp. So we go to Neptune and we go to Jupiter. We might say, oops, this is somebody who could develop crushes on friends. There may be love fantasies about friends at times because the ruler of the house of friendships falls in the house of romance. Or Jupiter in the ninth house, his friendships might read like a roster at the United Nations because he might know people from every country in the world.
And you're saying that if the house were empty, you're saying that Mars would be a ruler of that house?
No, I said Neptune.
Oh, Neptune.
But Neptune and Mars are conjunct,
Yeah.
so the, you know,
Drag Mars along.
yeah, exactly. So Mars would probably have an underlying influence in initiating new ideas while he is with these
Putting
friends and
energy
acquaintances.
towards that,
Right.
taking it.
Exactly.
And then if we look at the 12th house, which is one's secrets or sorrows or inner life, we have Taurus there, which means Venus is the ruler. And, you know, when Venus rules the 12th house, it can either bring in, I mean, worst case scenario is clandestine romances. Not so worst case can be being a closet case artist. This might be, who knows, perhaps he keeps a violin tucked under his bed.
But also, Taurus represents personal values. So he might sacrifice his personal values. See, he might sacrifice his love and the things that he would like to do and what he would like to possess or whatever it has to do with Taurus. And he might have to sacrifice those in order to accomplish what he wants to do as far as communicating with the public at large. So his personal values might have to take a second seat, in other words, too.
Mm-hmm.
But
It just seems to me that this man could be homosexual.
I was just
Because the Mars with the Neptune, and it's a fantasy, he doesn't act on it. He's got Venus in the 8th house, so he keeps it undercover. You know, that's the house. And then in the 12th house is when you closet something. So to
only
me,
with murder and stuff like that, though, I would say.
12th house is everything. The priest and the
He's really just a cross-dresser.
And that's it, he's a closet.
Right.
Because it's in Taurus, he likes fashion. That's it.
He may be the Ed Wood of the philosophical world. Who knows? But again, we don't know any of that. We don't have him here to question. You know, we're having fun. We can jump to.
All kinds of conclusions.
And again, when I look at a chart, I like to look at best case scenarios and worst case scenarios because the truth may lie somewhere between those extremes.
The way I see it is the man walks the line. See, in order to be able to do what he's doing, because of other people's money, of pleasing other people, he is a pleaser rather than an individualist.
Because he probably gets lots of grants and
Right,
fellowships.
exactly.
So he can't wear the pink poodle sweater in public. Okay.
He's kinky and sexy.
We can only talk about the passion of the Western mind. You cannot.
The other passion.
Right, the other passion.
But he can put
All
on
right.
a long wig and some stilettos and prance around at night.
All right.
That's
We'll end this by having assaulted his manhood. And
It's not.
It's a very interesting card, Bill. I would love to meet that person.
yeah,
I would
I
at
can't
least
look
try.
at his
At least
chart.
at some point, read his writings. They're not always an easy read, but they are
He's
brilliant.
very scholarly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I can't look at his chart without falling in love with him. It has a whole lot of things that are resonant with my own
Mhm.
chart. And it's so interesting because when I started reading him, it just hit me upside the head. It truly was a resounding impact. So,
And I would
it's neat when
imagine
you
with
can-
the ruler of the house of friends or fans falling into his 5th house, that many people fall in love with him because of.
Right, because you got Mercury
You know,
and
that-
Mars making a nice
the
trine.
ruler.
Right.
Yeah, and his love affairs are with his readers, the anonymous.
Neptune. falls
And
across.
Is the ruler of fans?
The 11th house
cool.
is your fans.
Well, it's on my Jupiter.
Okay.
That's
I
one
don't
of the
think
real
you'd like
tight
me very
reasons.
much.
We've already decided that.
They're just in different wavelengths, aren't you? They're just
All right. Any questions on tonight's class? We've made it to 8:30.
This was wonderful.
It was
It was
wonderful.
Okay.
Chris, it was
Hopefully-
so fascinating.
Thank you. Hopefully it's not over your head. I'm throwing a lot of information out today, but we're going to spend 5 weeks doing this. So, the more you hear it, the more we practice it, the more clearer it'll become. All right. Thank you for coming. See you next week. And goodbye to all of you who are out there in Neptune land.
Yeah, questions.